Welcome to the Unfinished podcast. Truth be told, we've never really learned how to deal with our unfinished business. In a society that's taught us to be put together, what do we do when our world falls apart? Most importantly, why does our world fall apart? See, right now we're living through the most significant transformation humanity has ever known. Knowing how to pick up our pens and write a renewed story has never been a more important conversation. So welcome to the podcast that interviews heroes that at some point had to start again and rise to glory.
Cole Gibson.
One of Australia's top 100 most influential women.
Love is always there.
The more love you give, the more you get it back.
We're all connected.
And that's unification. It is with great pleasure, Sarah, that I get to introduce you to our beautiful growing family and community around the world. My favorite part about doing this podcast is I get to actually catch up with all the people I love. So that's my total selfish intent for having a podcast. But it's been, about over a year since I saw you, and I just am hearing now of this amazing news that your first book is now being published with Hay House, and I feel so proud of you and so happy for you. But what I specifically loved about your share just then, and I think it's so poignant, in this discussion with what this specific podcast is focused on, is you just sharing, you reach this dream and you reach this goal and you actually recognize that there's been a shift in what is important to you fundamentally. And that's actually the quality of your work and the amount of presence that you share with your work. And so I think that that's a powerful place to begin. What was that shift? What spurred that shift for you in thinking and priority?
First of all, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me, Nicole. And it's always wonderful to see you and catch up with you. For me, the shift is gradual. And I think it's a good thing that it's gradual because, there's all these little pieces of the puzzle that have to fall into place. And so one of the things that I've come to realize in my own journey is that there's no need to rush the process, the process of growth, the process of creativity, the process of healing, because I think, there's something really beautiful and magical about being exactly where you are and learning to embrace whatever is happening. And that's always the hardest thing for us, especially when we're going through tough times. There's always that sense of urgency to get out of the challenge, the difficulty, the discomfort. But I truly believe that, my journey has so far taught me that embracing discomfort is where the gift is at, I really believe that becoming comfortable with the discomfort, getting curious about it, using it, as an avenue for creativity, using it as an avenue for self-understanding and self-curiosity and self-compassion or self-love or, self-realization is the key, as opposed to using it, as a way to self-destruct, right? So
true. So true. And, before we go deeper into that, I think that that's a really powerful thing for people to hear, because as we were just discussing, I think a lot of people through this time feel this sense of urgency, whether that's to just move forward or to go back to how things were. And, I'm interested from your view as a psychotherapist, why do we struggle to be in that in-between place? What is it about the human design? And, is it our design, or is it how we've been conditioned socially to just resist the uncomfortable in between, or not being at the place, that is most ideal in our thinking? What is that?
I think it's our conditioning. I think, we live in a culture, in a society, on a global scale, where we're conditioned to look at life in a certain way that's very much based around survival and based around fear. And that's also something that manifests itself within the family structure and the family dynamic. It's something that cuts deep, into our core. Just the way that we think we have to be in this world, who we think we have to be, what we think we need to own or have or achieve in order to be seen, in order to be valued, in order to be, successful, right? But my definition, and I used to be the same, right? I used to think exactly the same way. I'm no different. I had the same conditioning. But one of the things I realized in my journey is that success is not this definition that we have, that this misconcluded this definition that we have about it. It's not, all the things that you think it is, what you watch on TV, or, what you see, whatever, in celebrities or whatever it is, right? Or people who, sometimes the people do incredible work, and that's great, right? And success comes with that. But I think at the core of that, it's all about power, personal power. It's all about, how you perceive yourself as a person, your sense of worth, your sense of value, that you really have understood the fact that nothing outside of you can give you this sense of worth and value. And that the only thing you really need in life to feel worthy, to feel loved, is you. And this is a really hard concept for us to grasp. What do you mean? I only need myself to be happy? Bullshit, right? I need this and that and him and her and you name it. And I'm not suggesting that we isolate ourselves. Relationships are incredibly important for our growth. Community is incredibly important for our growth. But when we place our sense of worth, our sense of, value on what's outside of ourselves, we lose ourselves, right? We lose that essence, which is the thing that we're actually born with as babies, that essence, that diamond, right? And as soon as we're born into so many expectations, we're born into, whether it's the culture of the family or the culture of society, whatever country you're in, doesn't matter. You're born into trauma narratives, stories and experiences. You're born into expectations, parental expectations, cultural expectations. So we continue to get further and further away from this essence. I always say to my clients, we literally separate from this I amness, right? And as we separate from that, as that separation takes place, we also lose that authenticity. And so our whole goal becomes about what we can get from the outside. How can I be seen? How can I be heard? How can I be valued? Because there's only two things that really matters to a child. My parents are okay, and that I matter. And if you're born into a family unit or a culture where you don't really experience that, then you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to matter, right? Trying to be seen.
Until you don't. Yeah. I think that's really powerful. So, one of the things that my therapist taught me a little while ago that I found so transformative was her explanation to me that when we don't have our needs met, so these needs met as a child, we'll cope in one of two ways. We'll either yield and make others' needs more important than ours, so we make our parents' needs more important than ours, or we learn to be more dominant and forthcoming and demand that our needs are met. And in that, there's this imbalance, and that was really like pivotal for me, because I was like, wow, this is really, I think, one of the keys to what actually blocks our flow state, like this ability to feel like we can harmonize with our environment, because I trust that you're okay, and I trust that I'm okay, and I trust that your needs are going to be met and my needs are going to be met. There's no fight. And I recognized, wow, like a lot of the imbalance that I was experiencing, not just in my relationships, but in life, came from this tendency I had to make others' needs more important than my own. to the point that it was difficult for me to even identify when I had needs. That was, really complex, because I would have people say to me, you need to learn to state your needs and you need to learn your boundaries. But I mean, for me, and I think a lot of listeners are actually going to relate, so I'd love to hear your insights. Where do you even begin when you're not even aware of either the needs you have, or you're not even aware of how much you dismiss the needs of others around you?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I know for me personally, I used to be the emotional parent of my parents.
Yeah.
I literally learned to do that from a very young age, because that was the only way that I could connect. That was the only way that I could still feel an attachment to them, right? Or somehow unconsciously, kind of feel safe and secure, that I'm not going to be abandoned. So if I soothe you, even though you can't soothe me, if I can be there for you, even though you can't be there for me, I don't even know how to be there for me, right? No one really teaches you that, especially if they can't do that for themselves. Then that way you're going to be attached to me. You're going to need me, so you won't abandon me, right? And so you mentioned trust. Trust is crucial, because if you don't develop trust, first of all, in the people that are raising you, in the people that are in your immediate environment, if you haven't learned that you can trust them, or that there is that emotional safety and emotional availability, then your ability to build trust basically is diminished, right? And so if you can't build that trust in yourself, how are you going to build it in the universe? How are you going to trust the universe? How are you going to trust life? How are you going to, trust your creativity, or whatever it is that you want to do in this world? I think, to go back to your question, what's the first thing someone can do to become aware of,
what are the symptoms is maybe a nice place to begin unpacking now, like how, because I think a lot of us, we don't even start looking at it until the pain is so bad. Like, we're so deep in isolation, or we've had the pattern repeat itself so many times before we actually start to turn the mirror back on ourselves and ask, okay, who's the real common denominator here? But what are some of the earlier symptoms that maybe we can start to recognize?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say, focus on what's happening with your nervous system. Yeah. For me, I started to experience this fight, flight, freeze, and also fawn trauma response at a very young age. I mean, I developed an eating disorder when I was a teenager. And even when I was younger, like as a baby, I had severe stomach related issues, IBS related issues, just really, things that just developed because of the environment that I was in, right? And I understand that now, but I didn't at the time. So tuning into your nervous system is really important. Checking in. Okay, so I'm going to mention the different states and what happens in those different states. So when you're in the flight state, right? When you're kind of experiencing things like anxiety, panic attacks, or there's a chronic rushing, or always going and doing, feeling uncomfortable, with being still, spending energy on micromanaging people or situations around you. Or if you have a history of abruptly ending relationships, or being, scared of commitment, phobic of commitments, feeling trapped easily, making plans to
I want to unpack all of these. Can we go through these one by one?
Yeah, we will. Because I'm still in flight. So we will definitely do that. Making plans to avoid any kind of downtime, or constantly throwing yourself into work and achievements. I have certainly done that myself, and I can really relate to this particular, state, the flight state. So before I move on to the other state, feel free to jump in and tell me, what you want to unpack with the flight state, or if you resonate with any of the things that I've mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is going to connect to some of those symptoms, right? And I really think this
Mm,
is a major pain point for so many people that I've worked with in my own life, for sure. Like the constant tension of that I feel when I don't feel free in some way has been something that I've had to seriously work at, because work and my vision and my
mm,
relationships require commitment. Like they require, I mean, at least this is what I've learned, for what it's worth, for all of you guys, is we've got to find a willingness inside of us to
mm,
meet, people, and meet situations and circumstances, even when there's that discomfort there. And if you can't
mm,
find a willingness that's greater than the desire to run away, then it's
mm,
going to be very difficult to see progress. But it can actually feel counterintuitive to do that, because every part of your system is like, I need to get away as fast as I can, to actually calm the nervous system and choose something different, to make a different
mm.
choice, is incredibly transformative, but very, very difficult. So I'd love to kind of maybe dive into why that is, for someone that experiences the flight response,
Mm.
what is happening in their nervous system, in their neurology, and how can they start to overcome that?
So when we're in the flight response, what's happening is that our body is feeling threatened, right? I mean, our body's feeling threatened even if we're in the fight response or freeze response, but usually it's the fight and flight response where the body's kind of preparing for danger. And the way the mind body connection works is that the mind doesn't know the difference between a thought and an actual physical experience.
Mm.
And so if your feelings of being trapped, let's say in a relationship, reminds you of how you felt as a child, feeling trapped perhaps in the relationship dynamic that you had maybe with your mom or with your
But that might
dad,
not
or
be conscious, right? That might not be conscious, because I think that's a
that's
really
not
important
conscious.
thing for people to understand, is you might not be recognizing that on a conscious level. Yeah.
Absolutely, you won't. But that's why it's important to pay attention to your physical symptoms and
Mm.
also look at the behavior, right? Because our nervous system affects the way we think, the way we interact, the way we experience the world around us. And when we feel conflict, like the possibility of abandonment or emotional overwhelm, our nervous system steps in to protect us against this threat,
Mhm.
right? And so for the flight response, this is what it looks like: avoiding conflict, ghosting people, running away from situation, ignoring situation. Escapism is coping. I know for me, it's interesting because I was into law of attraction for a long time, and I obviously still believe in law of attraction because it's part of one of the laws of the universe. But I was a big part of that community, and it wasn't until I understood everything about my own trauma that I realized how many of these people that were within that community were still stuck in their trauma, stuck in that flight. Now I have a reason, now I have an excuse, right, to leave this person or to run away or to do whatever I want or to be spiritually free, right? They weren't spiritually free. There was no freedom there. The freedom that they experienced was an illusion. They were caught in a cycle of going from one thing to another in the name of following your bliss. And that's why it's so, so important to first understand your trauma, to understand the trauma response, to understand why your body is reacting the way it's doing, to look at the contrast, to get curious about the contrasts, to be with the contrast and the discomfort. Everything starts from in here. Wherever you go, you're taking this with you, right? The inner reflects the outer. So even if you're going somewhere else thinking, oh, I'm going to start my life from scratch, you can't dismiss what's going on in here, right? And I'm not just referring to what's going on in the body, I'm also referring to what's going on in the mind. The mind and the body are in constant communication with each other all day long. And so if you have these certain belief systems, trauma narratives that you haven't explored and you haven't healed from, you're taking them with you wherever you go, no matter how many courses you do, how many books you read, how much you achieve, these patterns will continue. And that's why this stuff is really powerful. These trauma responses, they're not voluntary. meaning that we don't consciously control them. You know, whenever you feel, I always tell my clients this, whenever you feel yourself becoming overwhelmed, pay attention to what's going on in your body. Notice your heart racing, your chest tightening, you know, your mind spacing out, leaving your body, you know, almost like blacking out. Pay attention to that, because the more you pay attention to that, the more you become curious about what's going on, the less you're going to get caught up in the actual trauma narrative that's taking place in your mind. You know?
Amen. This is really valuable.
Because you can actually, when those things happen, you can practice letting other people know, even, you know, hey, my nervous system is overwhelmed. You know, my body's shutting down right now. You know, I actually think I need to take a break. I need to pause, you know, this conversation. Can we get back to this when I'm feeling a bit more grounded in my body?
So it's interesting, right? Because I think that someone that is like conflict adverse, how overwhelming that can actually feel to even set that boundary. And, you know, I'm relating to this. One of the moments in my journey that really just like confronted me with how difficult I actually found what you're talking about. And it took a huge amount of like just overcoming my self-judgment and overcoming like the kind of disconnection of not wanting to be with how uncomfortable that was in myself. Was I did this keynote talk, and I'd been under, you know, stage lights for 90 minutes, and then I had this 3-hour book signing, you know, in 40-degree heat with this queue of people that were just like at me. And I was feeling super like, you know, just overwhelmed by it all. And people, like when you're in that environment, people are often not seeing you as a person, you know, they're fixed on what they want to get from you. And so as someone that has this pattern of like, I'm unconsciously at that point, this is many years ago, was putting everyone else's needs before my own need. I got to this point where I remember I really had to go to a bathroom. I really had to go and pee, and I just could not. It's like I couldn't assert that because there were so many people around me, and all I needed to say was like, I have to take 5 right now. Everyone like just pause, and I couldn't bring myself to say it. And I was also really thirsty. And someone walked through the group of people, and they handed me a glass of water, and I just remember thinking like, that is the kindest thing ever. Like I just thought it was like so amazing that someone would actually see my struggle in that moment, rather than like, can you find this book, and this book is for this person, and this is their life story, and this and that, and like pulling me, you know, literally like pulling me. There was this person that saw me in that, and after that moment, it really was like one of my awakening moments where I was like, wow, I really struggle to assert my needs, and just the depth of trauma that was actually there for me, and how hard that was for me to overcome. And as I started to become aware of it, and a note for anyone that's relating to this and maybe thinking about this for the first time, it was really difficult to see how that very trauma had actually infiltrated every single area of my life. And one of the most painful things was recognizing just how much I had abandoned my own needs, like coming to terms with that pain, which was the ultimate pain. When I got past my mom and dad abandoned my needs, and, you know, my partners abandoned my needs, and my friends abandoned my needs. When I got past all of that and realized actually it's me that's been abandoning my own needs, that was the hardest thing to come back to. And so any like perspective there on how someone can gain the strength to be willing to sort of do that work, because it's deep. What you're describing is very deep work.
It is deep work. And I believe that it's meant to be deep work. It's like literally our life's work, you know, and I love the insight that you gained, because usually for people who are flighters, they struggle to express their needs. They struggle with boundaries. They struggle, you know, with knowing where to draw the line, you know, and so the way that they do that is by seeking freedom, by needing their own space, by being kind of avoiding the commitments, right? Because I don't trust myself enough to take care of me while being with you, or you and all of you, right?
Wow.
Because I care so much about what you need from me that I'm just gonna, you know, give into that, because that makes me feel so good. Because there's this alter ego, right, that we all have, where our sense of self is attached to what we give. Our sense of self is attached to what we think we have to do for others in this world. My job is very giving, right?
Mhm.
But I always make sure that I give to me more than anybody else. And this is not a selfish way of giving. I'm referring to giving in the sense of the most subtle things. I'm not talking about giving like, you know, oh, I've got to do this for me and that for me and whatever it is. It's more about tuning in, you know, putting your hand on your heart and just being like, what do you need right now?
Mm.
You know, and doing that often enough is going to help you stay connected to your needs on a moment by moment basis. What do you need right now? I'm here. I'm listening. It's okay. Whatever you need right now is okay with me, you know? And I run my clients a lot through these inner child visualization exercises and meditation in sessions, because I really want them to get the experience of how it feels to connect with yourself, to be with yourself. And often we struggle to do that on our own. That's why co-regulation is really important. It's hard for you to know how to self-regulate if you haven't learned how to co-regulate.
Yeah, totally.
So I believe in psychotherapy. I think, you know, especially with the right therapist who has that experience and who has that personal, you know, practice themselves, it's a really good way to just be held, have someone hold space for you as you learn to hold space for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a practice. It's practicing you ultimately have to do.
Yeah.
Your own.
Yeah.
But what you just said, I find really interesting, you know, that someone who is in that that pattern of flight, that it's you just shared that your belief is where that person is coming from is there's a part of them that actually has an alter ego that gains from that givingness. Do you think that that's always the case, or sometimes it's really just an unconscious pattern that people are running? And because I know as soon as I realized it, my desire to want to overgive just like was not that. It was when I became aware, because I actually felt quite violated. I had to go through this, like, you know, there was no part of my ego I didn't feel that was like, oh, that made me feel really good. You know, it was actually like, wow, no one actually has had the love. Well, this was the story I had to navigate. No one loved me enough or was present with me enough to actually bring it to my awareness that I was giving so much more than what I was able to receive. And that hurt, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, I do think this alter ego is always going to be with us, because I don't believe that you reach a state of enlightenment and then that's it, you know, all is well. That's it. It's over.
You just get an upgraded ego.
I think awareness, enlightenment is an ongoing thing. It's about building a relationship with that and making sure that that becomes a part of your beingness, right? That becomes a part of your I amness. Because, and I'm not saying I'm an expert at this. I don't even believe in the concept of expertise, right? I don't believe in it at all. I think, in fact, that it causes a lot of harm when someone says I'm an expert at this, you know. But what I'm saying is that it's a practice, and I'm practicing that, you know, and we need to practice that. Because if we look at even someone who is in a state of fight, and I grew up with someone who was in a state of fright. My dad was in a state of fight all the time, you know, temper that's very explosive, you know, unpredictable, you know, someone who shames you. And I'm pretty sure most people have grown up with one, you know, either parental figure or sibling or someone in their lives who mocks them or insulted them, or, you know, it's kind of like my way or the highway tendency to need to say, you know, that have the final word and ignore other people's perspectives, yelling, slamming doors, you know, becoming aggressive, reactive, you know, always feeling as though they're being threatened. So they have to protect themselves. They have to put up a wall. They have to, you know, either defend or attack.
Mm.
And then afterwards, always feeling shameful and remorseful post outburst, right? So someone who's in that fight response is actually also confused about boundaries because they don't respect other people's boundaries, right?
Oh.
And they don't have any awareness of their own either.
So important, you know, in this conversation, what is really like illuminating is just how important it is to really look beneath someone's behaviors, you know, not take things on a surface level, because if we were to do that with someone that seemed like not just good, but like very forceful about enforcing what they want and their boundaries, and it's my way or the highway, actually, and you know, without going too deep into my own rabbit holes, like a big part of my journey was recognizing I grew up a lot around that attitude, and I had to find a way to actually see the vulnerability in that the person that was being really assertive, or the people in my life that were being really assertive, underneath that was actually a deep fragility, something that they couldn't be present within themselves. And it really made me rethink this kind of, I think, traditional idea of what we now see vulnerability to be, the more that it's become this global conversation. Actually, no, vulnerability can be that person like yelling, slamming a door, like they are so deeply vulnerable on the inside, and that's what is propelling them, because it's so painful for them to be with that vulnerability, to act in those ways. And when I started to understand that, my ability to take it less personally, my ability to really like see them underneath their behaviors, all of that started to improve and increase.
Absolutely. That is spot on. That is spot on. When I didn't have contact with my dad because of, you know, a whole bunch of stuff that happened in my life that I've, you know, written about in my book, Coming to Life, but I didn't have contact with him for 23 years. And after I met him and I really spoke to him about his perspective and what he went through, you know, in our life, and just when he was young, and he was a young dad as well, I gained a newfound sense of compassion for him. And I'm so grateful for that, because now I work with a lot of clients who either suppress anger, which leads to chronic pain, often, you know, suppressed rage. And there's a brilliant doctor who's no longer alive, who's written several books about it and whose work I really respect, Dr. Sano. He wrote about how suppressed rage actually contributes towards the state of, you know, chronic pain pandemic that we're experiencing in our world today. And I also see clients who, you know, project their anger. So I see both the flighters and the fighters. And for them to have, you know, for a fighter to have someone there who doesn't take it personally, and who gets curious about what you need, and who just holds space for you completely, you know, it's such a loving, you know, act for a person that's in that state. You know, it's like, oh my God, you know, here I am trying to attack, and you're not really a threat to me anymore. You know, all you want to do is just hear me. So what I always recommend is, when you're dealing with someone like that, is ask questions, because it's never personal. Everything we do in life is a projection. Everything someone says is a projection. Everything is always about what's going on in here, because the inner reflects the outer, like I said before, you know? And so just to kind of wrap up that talk about the nervous system, because I think it's also important to also bring up the freeze response, right? When your body's been in, you know, goes in and out of this fight and flight, it's so exhausting for our body, for our physiology, because of the amount of cortisol that the body produces. And the cortisol is the stress hormone, you know, and your body can't break down, you know, that much cortisol. You can't be in that state chronically, which actually in today's world and society, we are doing that. We're literally living in that state chronically, you know, and so that's when the body goes into the freeze, the state of freeze, you know, completely numb, getting ready for death, basically, shut down, silent treatment, you know, complete avoidance behavior, hiding from the world. procrastinating or not even being able to make small decisions, endless scrolling of social media and binge watching TV, or Netflix or whatever. Confusion about what's real, what's unreal, what's actually happening, not happening. And then this is when people often get misdiagnosed with depression, and also start to get, diagnosed with things like fibromyalgia.
Wow.
Because the system just can't take it anymore.
What would you call this? Just a nervous system that needs to be regulated, and not any specific diagnosis, so to speak.
Well, usually when you get into that space, the body is just trying to balance itself. It's kind of like just going enough's enough, basically. The body's just trying to balance itself, and it's not. Our body is such an incredible, wise instrument. Like I just think we have this, incredible temple that we live in, and all it's doing constantly is trying to make sure that we are balanced and that we're safe.
Yeah,
that's all that's happening. That's why I always say, don't focus on the symptom, focus on the cause when it comes to treatment, which of course our medical system isn't trained or designed to do, right? But it's really important to look at even just getting more aware of, if you're someone this is the first time you've ever heard of these things, become aware of what's happening. Which state do I tend to go into? Am I more of a, do I get angry, irritated, aggressive? And this is something that people go in and out of, even if they're in the flight, more of a flighter. So let's say if you're driving and you're behind the wheel, because you feel safe because no one else is around, that's when the fight comes out, right? And then that's where people often experience road rage.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, so we do have different symptoms, because as I'm hearing this, I'm loving this, by the way. I've spoken about the nervous system so many times, but I think you're explaining it in a way that's just really easy for people to understand. So thank you, because this is important work. Like what I'm relating to is, I think my default generally in life has been to flight, but when I let someone in, when I let someone close to me, my default out of these situations has actually been freeze, to completely shut down. And so does the level of intimacy change? Like I know that it has for me, that how I would respond to someone I wasn't really that connected to would just be to avoid, before. And if it was someone I was in a relationship with and they were yelling at me, which was my biggest trigger, raised voices, any kind of morsel of aggression, my whole nervous system would just shut down, and I literally couldn't communicate at all.
I relate. I was exactly the same. I completely relate.
So what is that? Why does the intimacy level change the response?
Because you see that person as a threat.
Okay. And you just
that's all it is.
Yeah. So that
you see them in your mind, you see them as a threat, and basically what you're doing is you're interpreting that as, this person is a threat. They don't love me. They don't care about me, right? I'm not going to be heard here. I'm not going to be seen here. You don't care about my needs. And so I need to get away from you. Or if you're a fighter, I need to fight you. Yeah. Because I feel so disempowered in this moment that that's the only way I'm going to feel empowered. And that's the only way I'm going to feel heard and seen by you, by fighting you.
Yeah.
By putting you down.
What about freeze? And that's just an inability. And why would it be in some contexts someone could be like flight, and then in a more intimate context someone could be free? Is it just like the level of threat?
We all go in and out of fight, flight, freeze, and even the fawn one that I haven't talked about yet. We all go in and out of it. It's just that some people are more susceptible to, one more than the other. It's more like they tend to be more of a flighter than a fighter. Like, for example, I was the flighter in my family. My sister was the fighter, So it's not that we don't experience the other ones. We always do. But we go in and out of it all day long. It's just that in today's society in particular, the the state that we call window of tolerance, which is the state of the ventral vagal state. It's basically when you're feeling grounded, present, you feel safe, you feel mindful, you're open, you can connect with others easily. You know, that state of curiosity, joy, right? That state, we call it the window of tolerance, is actually has become much, much smaller. So we barely, you know, we're meant to go in and out of that state too, but we barely, you know, stay there.
Wow. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If anything, we need to use or misuse substances to even experience that state, which is an illusion, because it's not really, you know, that's the only time you think you can relax, whether it's through smoking pot or drinking or whatever it could be, right? Drugs, you name it.
Yeah.
And so the free state is really the state where people disassociate a lot. They just they're so disconnected from their needs, so disconnected from their feelings. There's a lot of this video games, social media, you know, just
you have a whole
shutting out
like this though. Like we have a whole generation that are in this without any kind of supervision or support. Like it's just crazy.
Yeah, that's why I'm being approached, you know, by more and more parents asking me to work with teenagers, which I used to do before. But I kind of put, you know, I stopped doing that because you've got to work with the family as a whole. You know, the nervous system, your nervous system is always a reflection of the nervous system of your environment as well, the people that you're with, you know, so that affects your environment. And if we talk a little bit also about the fawn response, trauma response, which is an adaptive coping mechanism that we learn as children when our environment isn't fully safe. So when our environment isn't safe or predictable, we learn to adapt by dismissing our own needs and focusing on other people's needs. So if your parent figure, like my dad, had an explosive temper or was chaotic or emotionally absent, I learned unconsciously to be easy, you know, to be a good girl, to people please, to avoid any form of conflict. I became incredibly uncomfortable with conflict, which I've changed since then. And many people who fawn, they become chronically distracted with what other people think about them, because there was a time in childhood where the emotional climate of their home was determined by someone else outside of themselves. So for example, you know, the people pleasing, the going along with what someone else's perspective and beliefs and values are without really connecting to your own. Sometimes, you know, spacing out, almost like leaving your body, dissociating, letting other people make decisions for you, you know, avoiding situations that can lead to conflict.
That's an interesting one. I think that's a really, like, letting other people make decisions for you. I'm interested in that because I have a lot of people that come to me with that specific problem, not being able to make decisions. And I feel constantly indecisive. So I'd love you just to touch a little bit more deeply on that specifically. Why is that?
Well, we're, you know, on a global scale, we're hungry for leaders. We want leaders. We want leadership. But a great leader doesn't create followers. A great leader creates more leaders, right? So it's not about putting everything you have into another leader, but it's about becoming a leader of your own life. And this is what people
are conscious of, how much they look, you know, to other people to make decisions. I see this so much, Sarah, like whether it's, like team dynamics or community, like people, what they're truly craving. And it doesn't matter how much you can tell someone sometimes, the way to solve like the problem that you're looking to a leader to solve is by becoming that leader, is by making those decisions. And, you know, you're going to fuck it up. You're going to get it wrong. You're going to make bad decisions. And actually that's a part of the process that every single leader's gone through to become an effective decision maker. But people are so paralyzed often, like in that they just cannot come to terms with, oh, but if I make the wrong choice, this is going to happen. That person's going to be mad at me. But, you know, coming full circle to what you said in the very beginning, it's about you knowing why you made the decision you made and loving yourself in that, no matter you know, if it was the wrong decision or whatever, you can choose again, you fix the problem. That's what it means to lead. But I think we have a whole world right now that is so terrified of stepping into truth. And I think that's a very poignant symptom. And I think what you're touching on really can give people so much clarity around why they struggle with this. Indecision is I think one of the biggest challenges we're facing actually in terms of our progress as a society. We're leaving major decisions about the trajectory of our economy, our world to very few people. And to me, that's really going to backfire unless we have more people that actually step forward and say, I'm willing to be, you know, accountable to the decisions I make in sovereignty as an individual.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that, you know what, when you're constantly being polite, agreeable, not wanting to, you know, create any kind of conflict, you know, contribute to it, or, you know, hyper aware of other people's emotional needs or responses and betraying your own, then that's not really helping you either, you know,
or anyone else.
Yeah. Healing is about making small steps outside of your comfort zone to create confidence and to slowly get to a place of knowing what essence is all about. What's, you know, that sense of self that you lost as a baby is about, you know? And so I'm going to give people some practical tools because I know that sometimes it's really hard to understand what to do when it comes to this stuff. You know, stating little boundaries to someone can really help you get comfortable with the concept of boundaries. When it comes to building trust with yourself, relationship with yourself, start with one thing per day, one thing that you commit to every day. It can be anything, you know, every morning for the last God knows how many years. I every morning start my day with a glass of water and a whole squeezed lemon in it. You know, if I can get through that, if I can just show up and do that for myself, the rest is just bonus, right? So this is how we build this commitment to self. You know, and then you can do other things like turning down an invitation without having to explain yourself or over apologize, you know, making time to journal your own values, your thoughts, your beliefs, and then looking back at the pattern. What's important for me, you know? And this is especially hard if you haven't really practiced this stuff, if you don't really know yourself. Just focus on the things that you feel are important for you. You know, let people know how they make you feel.
Consistency, like, I think is another thing I want to highlight in what you're saying. You know, it is so difficult to build trust and confidence unless you have consistency, because how are you meant to build? It's like a building. Like, we need to build that building one brick at a time, and consistency is the way to do that. And, you know, an example I often give is if you tell yourself, I'm going to make a salad for lunch today, and you go to the fridge and then you get out, you know, a bar of chocolate, you have taught yourself, I can't trust. Like, when I say I'm going to do something, I don't actually follow through. So you are not giving yourself any opportunity to develop trust with yourself unless those things become consistent for a long enough period of time, that when you start to assert a greater decision, you know, your conviction. And it doesn't mean, like, a lot of people think that leaders, their conviction means that they always get it right. Oh, this person has conviction, so that they must only make good decisions. It's just so not like that. It's like that conviction has nothing to do often with the you know, the perceived success or failure. It's it's the person being convinced that they will do what they say they were going to do. You know, that's it. It's that integrity. Yeah.
That's why I love creativity, because creativity, and, you know, for those of you who don't know, I love painting. Besides writing, I love to paint, you know, and I also run art therapy workshops and art workshops in general. But I just want to touch a little bit on that because I think it's really important. The practice of creating from the tiniest little thing, such as drawing, playing with color, you know, just showing up and looking at this blank canvas, which is really what I do every time. and I have no idea what I'm going to create. I don't copy anything. Everything I create comes from within me, right? That practice of creating teaches us to value ourselves and to show up and believe that our contribution is worthy and worth the risk. This is how we learn to trust ourselves as capable creators in this world. This is how we become co-creators with life, you know? And I really believe that every day presents new opportunities for us to, you know, catch ourselves from sleepwalking and, you know, really just start noticing what's happening around you, what's happening in your body, you know? You get to choose the colors. You get to choose the texture that you lay down every day. You get to decide what steps, you know, what stays, what goes, what comes back in a different form, you know? And the reason people struggle with that is that perfectionism kicks in, you know? Yeah. But perfectionism doesn't believe, you know, in being a student. Perfectionism doesn't believe in practice shots. It doesn't believe in improvement, you know? It doesn't, it's never heard that anything worth doing is worth doing badly. You know, and if we allow ourselves to do something badly, we might in time become good at it. Right.
I think it's this, like, because I think that's so valuable as well, because it stops so many people from starting that very behavior and giving them themselves an opportunity to become great at something. But I've really analyzed where that comes from in people, because again, it's a problem that people often come to me like looking for answers for, and the community. And I think it is really driven by this kind of society that just always paints the end result. We're just so used to seeing the end result. No one has actually been exposed to the process. No one sees the, you know, the 18 hours of calls a founder makes in a day until it's 3 a.m. and they still can't sleep because, or they, like everything that they have on their plate through their mind. They don't see that. They see the keynote speech, you know. And that is, you know, it's almost like a cliche thing to say, but I really want you guys as listeners to let that land. Like, you are not used to seeing the messiness of the process, the points of contention, the points of doubt, the points of frustration. So when you meet those things in your own process, you often are left to believe that you are the only one that has these struggles, but it's actually a very normal part of the creative process to become, you know, masterful at anything. You have to go, there's actually no path, you know, that to mastery that is void of those challenges.
Do you know how people can make peace with the journey? I believe that if you can just enjoy the process of whatever you're doing, and just be aware that perfectionism thrives on comparison and competition. You know, it doesn't know how to say, good try, well done, right? It doesn't believe in any of that, you know? And so it thrives on comparison. And so if you can just be aware of that and then do whatever you're doing from a place of enjoyment, you know, like I love to create whatever I'm creating. I'm not creating it because, hey, someone else is going to say, oh, wow, that's so pretty. Because then I'm not really creating with, you know, from this space of connecting to the creative God within me, right? Because I really believe we all have that. I mean, if you look at children, they don't hesitate. They draw, right? They don't care. They draw whatever it is. And then they come up to you and they go, look what I just created.
And they want to be celebrated. They want to be celebrated in it. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. We have that within us. But because we end up, you know, becoming conditioned and
kills all
learning
the
about
joy.
how
kills
exactly.
The joy.
Yeah. And then the whole concept of what other people think of you is a definition of who you are. What other people think of you is really what defines you. What other people think of you becomes so important that it drains our power. You know, it just disconnects us from it, right? So I really think that creativity is the natural order of life. You know, life is energy, pure creative energy. And I think that when we open ourselves up to creativity, we open ourselves up to the creator's creativity within us and our lives. You know, we open ourselves to learning how to trust ourselves a bit more. And so, if you go back to what I was saying about that whole fawn response, it's only when you start to do little baby steps, like take little baby steps and do little things that help you build trust with yourself, that you can stand up for your own perspective. I see how you feel about this. I see it differently. We disagree on this, and that's okay. Right? Because fawning is a pattern. It's just a pattern. It's just a conditioning. All of these trauma responses, it just becomes our conditioning. It's not who we actually are.
Amen.
And so I think it's really important that people, whomever is listening or watching this can really take that in. Your trauma, whatever you went through in life, is not who you are. But because you haven't necessarily been aware of what's going on, or you haven't had time to process it or heal it, you're still operating from that narrative, whether it's conscious or unconscious, and often it is unconscious.
Yeah. This is so valuable. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. I know that all of these guys will have gotten so much out of this conversation. And for the sake of time, I just want to ask one last question, because I thought it was really valuable.
Sure.
That came through. Someone asked, how do we help other people in our lives? And we've spoken to it a little bit, but any kind of other practical tips you have that are displaying, now that this is all in everyone's awareness, displaying one of these trauma responses, what is the best thing we can do to support others to kind of relax and actually develop more of these relationships that are based in love, and connection, rather than constant, running away and whatever other patterns, shutting down, disassociating? What are some positive steps we can take in our own relationships from here on that will bridge that gap?
I think it's important to understand your own nervous system, and also the nervous system of your partner, whomever is around you, people that are important in your life, because that's the only way that you can avoid taking it personally. But having said that, it's also, you also need to know what your values are in order to implement boundaries that are healthy. Because if you're just kind of trying to understand the nervous system and you're putting up with something that isn't really, what you really want to be putting up with, or that it doesn't feel authentic, then you're not really doing yourself a favor, nor are you doing a favor to the person that you're, the people in your life. Yeah. So I think understanding yourself is always really important, because that's the only way that you have, you will be able to understand others. I always say authentic kindness is saying no, when you're at your limit or when you need a break, as opposed to people pleasing, when you say yes and then you feel regret and resentful later, right?
And then it doesn't get done.
Exactly. Yeah. And standing up for yourself in a compassionate way is the only way that you can do the same for others. A people pleasing person would deny their own reality and take on someone else's reality as their truth, as opposed to just stand up for what they believe in. So there is, there's a lot that I could say. I think, also learning about the fact that your partner, if we're talking about relationships as such, then your partner isn't really responsible for your happiness. They can't really know how you feel unless you openly communicate it, and that the only way to really be in a relation with others is to be in a relation with yourself. And that's when you have to work openly to meet your own needs, communicate your needs to others, have clear boundaries, encourage freedom, to find the best version of yourself. And speak about uncomfortable truths. Don't feel like you have to avoid discomfort. You have to avoid things that are not comfortable, because I really think that's when you really can get to the depth of a lot of issues. You can really connect with people as well when you become comfortable with discomfort, whether it's an uncomfortable conversation to an uncomfortable sensation or emotion or feeling. Does that answer the question?
I think that that's super valuable. Yes. I mean, it does for me. I'm sure there's a million other questions.
There's so much more I could say about this, Nicole.
Yeah,
trust me.
massive.
I could go on forever
But
about
we didn't
it,
even get to the unfinished moments in your life. But this is great. I'm going to put this in like my team. My team have to like onboarding for their training in the future, because I just think that there's so much that all of us can learn from this conversation and understanding ourselves relationally in these ways.
I'm more than happy for you to have me back and for
Yeah,
us to
100%.
continue this conversation. I love to support people to become aware of what's going on. For me, the concept of conscious awareness is something that I'm really passionate about. I think that that's the only way we can step into our power, when we become aware of our trauma narratives, trauma responses, and that's where the awareness starts to slowly build, right? As opposed to getting caught up in whatever, becoming a part of a cult or becoming part of someone else's teachings and beliefs about something, because I think that's not the answer. The answer is self-understanding, self-realization, self-empowerment. Because when you are in a space of alignment with yourself, I promise you, nothing but good can come out of that, because you can really be in a position of, giving to the world. And you don't even have to make much of an effort, because you're not draining yourself. You're actually, it just happens naturally. I never feel drained by my work, because I just feel like, not that I'm saying I'm in my absolute alignment, no, but I mean, I feel like obviously alignment is something we go in and out of. But I think that the closer you get to aligning your mind, your body, and your spirit, right? Your energy.
Yeah.
The more you will be able to tap into your power.
Amen. Where can these guys read your book? Because I think that'll be the next question on everyone's mind. Where do they go?
So this book is very personal. I'm working on a second book as well, but with this book, you basically get an insight into my story and, how I experienced these trauma responses. And you can get hold of my book everywhere, from Amazon to eBay to Abe Books to Waterstones, you name it. It's everywhere online. So you just basically have to maybe add a link somewhere for them to connect to, but yeah, it's everywhere.
And is there a platform that's best to keep in touch with you?
I think the best platform to stay in touch with me is Instagram. I have Mental Awakening, which is my, the clinic website. And I also have a personal one, which is Sarah DK Art. I don't spend that much time on social media, I have to be honest. But I do try and keep people, informed about whatever I'm doing and whatever's coming up.
Perfect.
And I think the best way to stay in touch with me, by the way, is the podcast. Forgot to mention that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please, Mental Awakening support Sarah.
Mental Awakening podcast. I talk a lot more about trauma, healing. I talk about chronic pain. I talk about archetypes, pretty much everything under the umbrella of healing and psychotherapy.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Nicole.
Big.
So good to see you.
Always. I know. Hey, family, if you loved this podcast and you want to stay connected to a tribe of heroes all around the world that are here to make the world a better place and act from their hero brain and act from a place of love, bringing their head and heart into cohesion, then I just want to invite you to jump in our Facebook group for free. Just search the Critical Mass Crew and you're going to find us there. We have tribe calls weekly, and these podcasts actually streamed into that group. So we have an additional 20-minute Q&A with the guests every single week that is exclusive to people in the group. So you'll also find the link in the show notes. See you in there.